Alexander Kerensky is partially responsible for creating the modern geopolitical scenario we live in today. In March of 1917, the February Revolution overthrew Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, ending 300 years of Romanov rule in a matter of days. This revolution installed the Provisional Government of Russia, and in July, Kerensky became Prime Minister of that government, and hence, ruler of all of Russia. Later that year, he was overthrown by the Bolsheviks, causing a civil war between the monarchists and the communists. Communist victory eventually resulted in the entire Cold War, spreading communism around the globe. This was the reality that you, or more likely your parents, lived in. You might think then that being Prime Minister of one of the largest empires in history would be the defining moment of Kerensky's life. But you'd be mistaken. Kerensky went on to live a complete and fulfilling life, and while he never ever changed the fate of the world again, he far outlived absolutely anybody who ever called him an enemy. So let me assure you that when Kerensky was overthrown in Russia, he was better for it. And I'd much rather be Kerensky than Stalin. So after Kerensky fled Russia, he basically told the Americans that a monarchist victory would result in a government only a tiny bit less repressive than the Bolshevik one, if that. So then he went on to give lectures, and later in life became a history teacher in the USA. Fun fact, his grandson, Oleg Kerensky, went on to play the role of Alexander Kerensky in a 1981 film called The RITES. Imagine playing your grandfather in a film. In 1939, Kerensky went through divorce. Incidentally, he was hit on by an Australian journalist who worked for him as a translator and press secretary. Nell Tritton had experienced rally driving and had previously co-authored a spy thriller based on a true story about a failed plot to assassinate Vladimir Lenin. Nell married Kerensky the same year he split from his wife, and together, the two ran an anti-Nazi, anti-communist newspaper. Now you might be thinking, Ben, isn't permanently trashing Hitler and Stalin, especially when you're the former Prime Minister of Russia, just the best way to accidentally stick a fork in a toaster, and then accidentally get run over by a pack of 1,000 wild rhinos, who then turn around and run you over again several more times? Yeah, that is a really good way to suffer the fate of the best investigative journalist in the history of Russia. Nell, on multiple occasions, had to save Kerensky from assassinations. Susanna de Vries actually wrote a biography of Nell, and unfortunately I haven't read it. However, Susanna de Vries did give an interview to ABC News. According to the interview, Nell used her rally driving skills to get Kerensky out of an assassination attempt by driving him across Paris in a car chase, because Stalin had apparently sent a car full of machine guns to gun him down. In 1940, the couple fled Paris from the Nazi invasion, and in 1941, when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, Kerensky basically came out and said, the Nazis are evil, the communists are evil, but the communists are slightly less evil than the Nazis, therefore we need the communists to win. Unfortunately, he said, the communists have absolutely no hope of winning because they're just militarily so much weaker than the Nazis. He said the Nazis are going to mop the floor with them. And, we can laugh at that now because we know how it ends. But at the time, pretty much everybody thought the Nazis were just going to, clean up the Soviet Union in like 2 weeks. I have the book right here. In A.J.P. Taylor's coverage of the Second World War, he has a page on it where he lists how long each person thought the Soviet Union could last against the Nazis. The highest estimate for how long the Soviet Union would last was done by Franklin D. Roosevelt's advisors, who said the Soviet Union could only last 1 to 3 months. And somebody else, I think it was the British ambassador to Moscow, said that the Soviet Union would only last 10 days. Listen, I get that I'm going off topic here, but I can understand why they might think that the Soviet Union was extremely militarily inept, considering they had just tried to invade Finland, a country way smaller than them. They thought they'd conquer the whole country in 2 weeks. It took them months just to get some territorial concessions. Anyway, we all know how it ended. In 1945, tragedy struck. And before you take that out of context, no, I'm not talking about Hitler's death. I'm glad he died, he was awful. No, in 1945, the doctor told Nell that the water tank laced with lead that she had drunk from as a child was finally going to kill her. When Nell was 19, she watched her brother and her sister die right before her eyes. Their immune systems had been weakened by the lead in the water tank, which had caused him to catch the Spanish flu. The doctor then told Nell that she would also likely die because of the lead. So in 1945, when the doctor broke the bad news to her, Nell and Kerensky went back to Australia to see her family one last time. In 1946, Nell died of a stroke. Alexander returned to the USA and continued giving lectures and being a history teacher. In 1967, Kerensky retired. 3 years later, in 1970, he died of a heart disease, aged 89 years old. So in conclusion, Vladimir Lenin died of an incurable disease of the blood 5 years after the Russian Revolution. Trotsky was whacked in the head with an ice axe in 1940, 23 years after the Russian Revolution. Fun fact, did you know an ice axe isn't actually an axe that's made of ice? It's something you use to climb up ice, and that may seem obvious to some of you, but I actually always thought that Trotsky was hit in the head with an axe made of ice, and I always wondered, wait a minute, why didn't the ice melt on the way over to Trotsky's house? Surely the blade would have been at least dulled by the melting. And then I realised that, no, turns out an ice axe is just something you climb up ice with. Like, am I the only person who thought Trotsky was killed with, like, an ice? Was, like, stabbed in the head with an icicle? Because the way I saw it, it's the genius murder weapon. If you kill somebody with a weapon made of ice, then the weapon melts away and you don't have to bother scrubbing the fingerprints off. And then there's no evidence. It's genius. What was I talking about again? Oh yeah. In 1953, Stalin suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and died 36 years after the Russian Revolution. Kerensky, on the other hand, died 53 years after the Russian Revolution in New York after living a long and fulfilling life and going through multiple careers. But anyway, all I'm saying is, who really won the war, you know? Sometimes the best move is not to play.